Imagine a world where love grows softly, like the quiet breeze in a peaceful garden. A place where hearts meet under the warm glow of the setting sun. This is a story of love, trust, and delicate moments. Welcome to Sense and Sensibility. Meeting under the stars. The evening was drawing to a close as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft amber glow across the sky. It had been a long, tiring day, but for Emily there was a sense of peace in the twilight hours. Her feet crunched softly against the gravel path as she walked toward the old oak tree in the garden. It had been her haven for many years, a place where she could escape the bustle of life and let her thoughts wander. She paused beneath the tree, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Above her, the stars were beginning to twinkle, each one, a distant promise of something greater, something infinite. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the serenity of the night wash over her. She had always loved these moments of quiet solitude. It was in these peaceful pauses that she felt most connected to herself. As the soft rustling of leaves stirred around her, a sound caught her attention, a gentle footfall on the path. She turned, her heart giving a soft flutter. There, standing, at the edge of the garden, was a man she had never seen before. Tall, with a quiet strength that radiated from him even in the fading light, his eyes locked with hers in an unspoken understanding. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice deep and warm, like a whisper in the night air. Emily smiled, her heart racing slightly in her chest. "Not at all," she replied, her voice soft, carrying the warmth of the evening. "It's just the perfect time to be alone, don't you think?" The man nodded, taking a step closer. "I was hoping to find a quiet place to think. It seems I've stumbled upon your sanctuary." "This tree," Emily said, gesturing to the oak above them, "has always been a place for reflection, a good place to sort out life's questions." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And has it helped? You find answers?" Emily thought for a moment, the stars overhead flickering like scattered thoughts. "Sometimes," she said, her voice trailing off, "but sometimes the answers aren't as important as the questions themselves." There was a brief silence, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. The man stood still, absorbing her words, as if they held more weight than they appeared. "Perhaps," he said finally, breaking the quiet, "we're both searching for something." Emily turned her head toward him, curious. "What are you searching for?" He smiled, a slow, gentle curve of his lips. "I'm not entirely sure, but maybe it's something I didn't know I needed until now." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the stars overhead and the soft night air between them. It was as if time itself had paused, just for them. Emily couldn't explain why, but there was a warmth in his presence, a comforting kind of energy that felt familiar, even though she'd never met him before. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. "Would you mind if I sat here with you for a while?" The quiet, "It's comforting." She nodded, her heart calming as she stepped aside, making space for him beneath the oak. As he sat down, the soft scent of the earth and the grass filled. The air and the world seemed to settle into a perfect rhythm. The man looked up at the sky, his gaze following the stars. "It's amazing," he said, almost to himself, "how small we are beneath the vastness of it all. Yet we all seem to search for meaning." Emily followed his gaze, her thoughts drifting along with his words. "We're all searching," she murmured, "for something. But what that something is, maybe we don't always know." He turned to face her, and in his eyes Emily saw a spark of something she couldn't quite name. It was not the typical curiosity or interest she often saw in strangers, but something deeper, more sincere. "I think," he said, "sometimes we meet people at the exact moment we need them, even if we don't know why. It's as if life knows. We need a little guidance, a little company, and then we cross paths. Emily's heart fluttered, a soft warmth spreading through her chest. She didn't know why, but she felt an undeniable connection to him, as though she had known him, far longer than the few minutes they had shared. The soft glow of the moon reflected in his eyes, making him seem even more familiar, even more essential. And sometimes, she added, those moments are all we need. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly at peace. Presence of this stranger beneath the oak tree, the calmness of the night, and the beauty of the stars above, they all seemed to align in perfect harmony. She didn't know where this connection might lead, or if it would lead anywhere at all. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had found each other in a world that often felt far too big, too overwhelming. And as the minutes stretched into hours, they sat in comfortable silence, letting the night unfold around them. The world continued its quiet rhythm, and in that rhythm, Emily allowed herself to believe, just for tonight, that the answers she sought might one day come to her, just as surely as the stars would always find their place in the sky. The promise of tomorrow. The hours slipped by unnoticed as they sat together beneath the old oak tree. The air had grown cooler, but neither of them seemed to mind. There was something about the presence of the man beside her that made the chill feel less intrusive, less daunting. Emily had never experienced such an unspoken bond, a connection that seemed to transcend time and space. The world around them felt distant, as though it no longer mattered. As the last remnants of daylight faded, the stars above began to shine brighter, their steady glow a reminder of the quiet beauty that existed in the universe. Emily glanced at the man beside her, his eyes still fixed on the sky. There was something mesmerizing about the way he observed the world, as though he were trying to understand its deepest secrets, to unlock the mysteries hidden within its vast expanse. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "What brought you here, to this place, tonight?" The man turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers for the first time in what felt like ages. His eyes were dark, almost enigmatic, and they held a depth that made Emily's heart beat a little faster. He looked at her for a moment before responding, his voice low and reflective. "I've been looking for something," he said, his words carrying a weight that felt heavier than the air around them. "Something I couldn't find anywhere else. Maybe I came here hoping that somehow I would find it." Emily nodded, her own thoughts echoing his words. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Sometimes we search for answers in places we never thought to look." For a long time they remained silent, both lost in their own thoughts, yet still connected in some intangible way. Emily's mind drifted, reflecting on her own life. The years she had spent trying to make sense of everything, trying to find her place in a world that often felt too vast, too complicated. She had spent so much time running from one moment to the next, never truly allowing herself to pause, to breathe, to just be. But now, sitting here with him, the world felt smaller, simpler. The confusion that had clouded her mind seemed to lift, replaced by a gentle peace she hadn't felt in years. "You know," she said after a while, her voice a little steadier now, "there's a certain kind of magic in the stillness of the night. It's as if, for just a few hours, the world slows down, and we can finally hear ourselves think." He nodded, his eyes softening. "I've always believed that. In the quiet, we find clarity. But it's so easy to forget that, isn't it? The noise of life has a way of drowning out the things that really matter." Emily turned to face him fully, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something in the way he spoke, in the way he seemed to understand the deeper parts of her thoughts. It was as if he had been a part of her life for far longer than the few moments they had shared. He seemed to see past the surface, past the walls she had carefully built over the years. And in that quiet understanding, she felt something shift inside her. A subtle, almost imperceptible change, but one that stirred her soul nonetheless. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly seen. She smiled, her gaze lingering on the man before her. "I think you're right," she said, her voice filled with a new sense of conviction. "The world is so loud, and sometimes the only way to find peace is to let go of all the noise." He smiled back, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still. The stars above twinkled in agreement, the wind gently rustling the leaves of the oak tree, as if the earth itself were listening, understanding. "Maybe," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "this is what we need. A moment of silence to hear ourselves clearly, and to find what we've been looking for." Emily felt her heart stir once again, a soft warmth spreading through her chest. She had always believed in the power of quiet moments, in the way stillness could bring clarity. But tonight, with him beside her, the quiet felt different. It was as though it was more than just a pause in time. It was a space, an open, unspoken invitation to something more, something that both of them had been searching for, whether they realized it or not. As the night deepened, they remained beneath the tree, neither one speaking, yet both feeling the gentle weight of the moment. The stars above them were no longer just distant dots of light, they had become symbols of hope, of connection. And as Emily looked up at them, she felt a quiet promise settle in her heart, one that whispered of new beginnings, of journeys yet to be taken, and of the quiet love that had begun to bloom between them. The air grew colder, but neither of them moved. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the soft sounds of the night and the steady beat of their hearts. "You don't have to leave, you know," Emily said after a long while, her voice barely audible. "You can stay, for as long as you need." He turned to her, his expression softening. "I think I'll stay," he replied, his words carrying a weight of certainty, "for as long as it takes." And in that moment, Emily knew, with a quiet certainty of her own, that this was the beginning of something new, a new chapter, a new story, one that they would write together. The world might have felt vast and uncertain before, but now, with him by her side, Emily felt as though she had found her place. The stars above, the oak tree beside them, and the quiet, peaceful night all seemed to whisper the same message. Sometimes the answers don't come from the outside. Sometimes they come from the connection we share with each other and the quiet spaces we create in between. As the night continued to unfold, Emily felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how their paths would intertwine. But for now, under the stars and the old oak tree, that didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were here, together in this moment of quiet possibility. A dance of words and silence. The days that followed were a blend of quiet moments and unspoken understanding. Emily found herself thinking about the man she had met beneath the oak tree more than she cared to admit. His name was Jonathan, and there was something about him that stirred something deep within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Though they had only shared a few hours of conversation, the connection between them seemed to have taken root in a way that neither of them fully understood. Every time Emily walked through the garden, she could almost feel him there beside her, his presence lingering like a soft echo. It was on the 4th day after their meeting that she saw him again. This time, he wasn't alone. Jonathan had brought a book, an old leather-bound thing that looked well-loved and worn. He was sitting on the bench beneath the oak tree, flipping through the pages as though searching for something. His brow furrowed in concentration, but when he noticed Emily approaching, he set the book aside and smiled warmly. "Good evening," he said, his voice like a soft caress in the cool air of the late afternoon. I hope I'm not intruding. Emily smiled back, feeling the warmth in her chest once again. Not at all. It's always a pleasure to see you. She sat down beside him on the bench, glancing at the book he had been reading. The title was faint, the leather cover aged with time, but the name was still legible. The Art of Silence. I didn't take you for someone who reads about silence, Emily said, her tone playful but also intrigued. Jonathan chuckled softly. Well, it's not so much about silence, but about understanding it. I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about that night. The idea that sometimes the answers we're looking for don't come from words, but from the space between them. Emily nodded, her thoughts aligning with his. I've been thinking about that too. The quiet moments, the pauses in conversation, they can say more than words ever could. Jonathan's eyes softened as he turned toward her. Exactly. It's in those moments that we can hear ourselves most clearly. The world can be so loud sometimes, but in those silences, there's a kind of truth that rises to the surface. Emily's heart fluttered at his words. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this kind of conversation. Deep, reflective, and filled with quiet wisdom. It felt as though they were dancing around something unspoken, something neither of them had put into words yet, but both knew was there. A subtle, unacknowledged understanding. I think, Emily began slowly, her voice almost a whisper, that we're both looking for the same thing. Not answers, but the peace that comes with understanding. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained, just felt. Jonathan's gaze never left hers as he nodded. I think you're right. We don't need to solve everything, or know everything. Sometimes we just need to be present, to accept the quiet and let it speak for itself. There was something in the air between them now. Something shifting, a magnetic pull that neither could fully explain. Emily felt a warmth in her chest, a lightness in her soul that she hadn't realized was missing. It wasn't just the words they exchanged, but the way they understood each other without needing to explain. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, and the soft rustling of the leaves seemed to dance in rhythm with their thoughts. It was as if the world around them had slowed, giving them the space to truly listen, not just to each other, but to the stillness of the moment. As they sat there in silence, the air grew cooler, and Emily could feel the weight of the night settling in around them. There was a calmness in the way the day was fading, a quiet surrender to the coming night. And in that quiet, Emily felt a deep sense of connection to Jonathan. It wasn't just the moments they had shared, but the understanding that had blossomed between them without either of them forcing it. I've never been good at silence, she confessed after a while, her voice soft but steady. I've always felt like I had to fill the space with words, with noise. But when we're together, it's Jonathan different. Turned to her then, I don't feel the need to say anything thoughtful. At all. Maybe that's the point. We don't always have to fill the silence. Sometimes it's enough to just let it be. Emily smiled, the warmth in her heart growing. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not just by Jonathan, but by herself. She had spent so much of her life trying to make sense of everything, trying to solve the mysteries of the world, that she had forgotten how to embrace the quiet, how to let things simply unfold. As the last traces of daylight faded and the first stars began to appear in the sky, Emily leaned back against the bench, her eyes fixed on the heavens above. She could feel Jonathan's presence beside her, but there was no pressure, no need to fill the silence. Just the two of them, existing in the same space, sharing the same stillness. I think, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, that sometimes we find what we need, not by looking for it, but by allowing it to come to us when we least expect it. Jonathan's voice was quiet when he replied. And sometimes what we need most is to be with someone who understands that, who doesn't try to rush us, but lets us find our way in our own time. Emily nodded, her heart beating a little faster as she felt the truth of his words settle into her. This wasn't just about the connection they shared. It was about the way they had both come to realize that the answers they sought didn't need to be found. They were already here, in the quiet, in the spaces between their words. As the stars overhead grew brighter, Emily let out a soft sigh, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what the future would bring, or where this journey would take her. But for the first time in a long while, she felt as though she was exactly where she needed to be. And in that moment, beneath the oak tree and the vast expanse of the night sky, Emily knew that she had found something far more precious than any answer. She had found someone who was willing to sit in the silence with her, and in doing so, had helped her find a sense of belonging she had never known before. The gift of time. The days continued to slip by in a quiet, gentle rhythm. Each morning, Emily would find herself waiting for the moments when she could walk through the garden, her heart fluttering in anticipation of seeing Jonathan beneath the old oak tree. And every evening, he was there, as if waiting for her as well. The soft sounds of their conversations, filled with gentle laughter and reflective silences, became her favorite part of the day. It was during one of these evenings, as the sun began its descent behind the distant hills, that Jonathan arrived with something in his hands, a small, unassuming wooden box. His face was serious as he approached her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "What's this?" Emily asked, her curiosity piqued. Jonathan smiled, but it was a smile that held a certain weight, as if he were offering her something more than just an object. "A gift," he replied simply. Emily tilted her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "A gift? But we've only just met, Jonathan. You hardly know me." He sat down beside her, placing the box gently on the bench. His eyes met hers with a look that seemed to say everything, without saying anything at all. "Sometimes, Emily," he began, "we don't need years of knowing to understand something important. Sometimes it's the briefest moments that matter the most. It's in the spaces between the words, the silences shared. It's in the way we choose to be present with each other." Emily felt a warmth in her chest at his words. There was an honesty in his voice, an openness that made her feel as though she had been seen in a way she never had before. He opened the box slowly, revealing a small, delicate pocket watch. Its surface was worn with age, the brass gleaming softly in the light. The watch had an intricate design, etched with fine patterns that spoke of a time long past. Emily reached out to touch it, her fingers tracing the patterns on the surface. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Jonathan nodded. "It's more than just a watch. It's a reminder." "Of what?" she asked, her curiosity deepening. "Of the importance of time," Jonathan said, his voice low and steady. "We spend so much of our lives rushing, always thinking about the next moment, the next place, the next thing. But the truth is, the only moment that matters is the one we're in right now. And that's what this watch represents. The present, the gift of time, shared between two people who understand what it means to be here, together." Emily felt her heart swell at his words. There was something so profoundly gentle in his message, a quiet truth that resonated deeply with her. She had spent much of her life chasing the future, striving for things she thought she needed, never stopping to appreciate the present moment. But now, in Jonathan's presence, everything seemed clearer. She didn't need to rush. The present was enough. She turned the watch over in her hands, her fingers grazing the cold metal, as though trying to connect with the meaning behind it. "But what if I'm afraid that I'll never understand what to do with this time?" she asked, her voice filled with vulnerability. Jonathan turned toward her, his gaze softening. "There's no need to understand it all at once. Time isn't something to be figured out, it's something to be experienced. And the more we experience it, the more we realize that it's not about having all the answers. It's about knowing that we're here, together, in this moment. That's what matters. Emily felt a lump form in her throat, and she blinked back, the sudden tears that threatened to surface. For so long, she had believed that she needed to have everything figured out: her life, her future, her place in the world. But now, with Jonathan beside her, she realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. The answers would come, in time, but for now, she had something far more precious: the gift of time, shared with someone who understood her in a way no one ever had before. She smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I've ever received a gift that means so much." Jonathan returned her smile, his eyes filled with warmth. "It's not the gift itself, Emily," he said. "It's the time we choose to spend with each other. That's the real gift." The evening fell into a peaceful quiet as they sat together, the sound of the wind rustling the leaves around them the only thing breaking the silence. Emily held the watch in her hands, her fingers resting on its smooth surface, and for the first time in a long while she felt at peace with the present. She didn't need to have everything figured out. She didn't need to rush. All she needed was this moment. And in this moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the stars began to twinkle above them, Emily leaned back against the bench, closing her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, she found Jonathan looking at her, his expression soft but filled with something more, something she couldn't quite place. But whatever it was, it felt familiar, like a quiet promise, a whisper that told her she wasn't alone in this journey. The time they shared together, both in silence and in conversation, was enough. It was everything. And as they sat there beneath the oak tree, Emily realized that in the gift of time, she had found something far more valuable than any answer. She had found a connection, a quiet understanding, a love that didn't need to be explained, just felt. A quiet discovery. The days that followed felt like a dream. Time seemed to stretch, and yet it moved with an effortless flow that made each moment feel both suspended and fleeting at the same time. Emily and Jonathan continued to meet beneath the oak tree, their shared silences now comfortable, their conversations flowing with ease. There was something about their time together that felt different from anything Emily had ever known. Each evening, the garden became their sanctuary, a place where they could escape the noise of the world and find solace in each other's presence. They spoke little, but there was an unspoken understanding between them that felt like the deepest kind of communication. It wasn't always about the words they exchanged. Sometimes it was the way they looked at each other, the way the world seemed to pause whenever they were near. But one evening, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a small change that neither of them could quite put into words. Jonathan had arrived with the same quiet demeanor, but there was something different in his eyes that night, a new kind of intensity, a kind of restlessness that wasn't there before. As Emily sat beside him, she could feel the change in the air, like the subtle shift before a storm. "Is something on your mind?" Emily asked, her voice soft but tinged with concern. She had come to know him well enough to sense when something wasn't quite right. Jonathan was silent for a moment, his gaze distant as he looked out across the garden. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the space in a warm glow, but it did little to ease the unease that had settled over him. Finally, he turned to her, his expression more serious than it had been before. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with something unspoken. "About us, about what this all means." Emily's heart skipped a beat at the weight in his words. She had never seen him like this. Vulnerable, uncertain. It made her chest tighten, as though the space between them had suddenly become too vast, too empty. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. What's wrong?" Jonathan took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair, his eyes briefly closing as though searching for the right words. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with uncertainty. "I don't know what I'm doing here, Emily," he confessed, his words raw. "I don't know if I'm ready for whatever this is between us. It feels too much, too fast, and yet it feels like it's already too late to pull away." Emily's heart ached as she watched him struggle with his emotions. She had never expected him to be so open, so honest about his feelings. It was a vulnerability that mirrored her own, and it both terrified and touched her in ways she couldn't fully understand. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his, the soft touch grounding them both. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice steady, "we don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to rush. Whatever this is, we'll take it one step at a time. There's no need for us to define it right now." Jonathan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and doubt. "But I feel like I'm holding back," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I don't want to be afraid of this connection. But sometimes, I wonder if I'm just trying to protect myself." Emily squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with a mixture of empathy and understanding. She knew what it felt like to guard your heart, to keep it hidden away from the world for fear of getting hurt. But there was something in Jonathan's eyes, something that told her he wasn't like the others. He wasn't just another fleeting moment in her life. He felt like a promise, one she couldn't explain, but one she was willing to take a chance on. "I understand," she said softly, "but I don't want you to hold back with me. Not anymore. If we're going to figure this out, we have to trust each other. No more hiding." Jonathan's gaze softened, and for the first time that evening the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. He exhaled deeply, his grip on her hand tightening just a little. "Promise me something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me that no matter where this goes, we'll always be honest with each other, no matter how hard it gets." Emily smiled, a sense of peace settling in her chest. "I promise," she whispered back, her voice filled with sincerity. "No matter what." As the sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the garden, Emily and Jonathan sat in the stillness of the moment. There was no need for more words, no need for grand declarations. The quiet understanding between them was enough. For the first time, they both knew that they were no longer afraid of what might come. They had already taken the first step, and that was all that mattered. The weight of silence. The days that followed the conversation under the oak tree were filled with an almost palpable change. Jonathan had opened a door, one that neither of them had fully anticipated, and though there were no more words exchanged that evening, there was a deep shift between them. It was subtle, quiet, like the calm after a storm when the world felt still, yet the air hummed with unspoken truths. Emily had never been one to shy away from challenges, but this was different. It wasn't just about figuring out the next step or solving a problem. It was about understanding something much deeper, the nature of trust, vulnerability, and the quiet spaces between the words. They met again beneath the oak tree a few days later, as they always did. The sky was beginning to darken with the approach of night, and there was a cool breeze in the air that made the leaves rustle softly. Emily arrived early, as she often did, and sat on the bench, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't know what to expect tonight, whether Jonathan would open up further, whether they would continue their quiet exploration of what had begun to feel like something more. When Jonathan arrived, there was a different energy about him. He didn't immediately sit down beside her. Instead, he stood there for a moment, looking out at the horizon as if gathering his thoughts. His posture was rigid, and Emily could sense a weight in his presence that hadn't been there before. He looked like someone carrying a heavy burden, but unsure how to share it. After a few moments, Jonathan spoke, his voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about trust, and about being honest." Emily looked up at him, her heart tightening at the distance in his tone. "And?" she asked softly, her voice steady despite the unease she felt. Jonathan turned to face her, his expression conflicted. "And I think I'm scared, Emily. I think I'm scared that if I let go of all my walls, if I let myself trust you completely, I'll lose control. I've spent my entire life keeping my emotions in check, keeping things at a distance. And now, with you, it feels like everything is shifting, and I don't know how to navigate it." The vulnerability in his voice hit her like a wave, and, for a moment, she was at a loss for words. She had never seen him so open, so raw. It was as if he had taken the walls he had spent years building and torn them down, only to realize that he didn't know what to do with the space that had been created. Emily stood up slowly, moving toward him. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, close enough that their proximity seemed to fill the air between them, but not so close that it felt overwhelming. She could feel his uncertainty radiating off of him, but she also knew that this was a pivotal moment for both of them. The unspoken understanding they had shared was now on the edge of something deeper, something more intimate. "I understand what you're saying," Emily said quietly, her voice carrying a softness that matched the tender atmosphere of the evening. "I've been afraid of the same thing, Jonathan. Afraid to trust, afraid to let go of control. But sometimes I think the only way forward is to let the walls fall, and to let ourselves be. Just be. Together." Jonathan's eyes searched hers, as if looking for some kind of confirmation that he wasn't alone in this moment. And for the first time, Emily realized that she was no longer just a spectator in their connection. She was an active participant, offering him something she had never offered anyone before: her trust, her presence, and her willingness to move forward, even when the path was uncertain. "Do you trust me?" Jonathan asked, his voice trembling slightly, the question more profound than either of them had anticipated. Emily took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "I do," she whispered. "And I think that's enough." Jonathan closed, the distance between them, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. It wasn't an overzealous gesture. It was a quiet affirmation, a way of grounding them both in the shared moment. His fingers brushed against her skin, and the sensation felt like a spark, a jolt of energy that passed between them. The air around them seemed to thicken with the weight of their emotions, the silence now carrying a new kind of meaning. There were no more words needed. In that moment, the unspoken connection between them was enough. Jonathan's voice broke the silence again, softer now, more sure. "I think we're both afraid of the same thing: losing control, losing ourselves. But maybe that's what we're supposed to do: let go and trust." Emily smiled, her heart lightening at his words. She felt a weight lift from her chest as she realized that the path they were walking didn't need to be perfectly mapped out. The only thing that mattered was that they were walking it together, in the silence and the moments between the words. For a long time, they simply stood there, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, yet distant enough to allow the quiet to settle between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt like a promise that even in the quietest moments they would always understand each other. And as the first star appeared in the evening sky, Emily felt the weight of the moment lift from her shoulders. The fear she had once carried, the fear of letting go, of trusting, began to dissipate, leaving only the calm certainty that she was where she was meant to be. "Thank you," Jonathan said quietly, his voice carrying a sense of finality that spoke volumes. "For being here, for letting me be me." Emily turned to him, her heart filled with a quiet gratitude. "Thank you for trusting me," she replied softly. "For showing me that sometimes the quiet moments are the ones that speak the loudest." They stood there together beneath the oak tree as the stars above them blinked softly in the night sky. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt at peace. She had come to understand that sometimes The most profound connections didn't need to be explained. They just had to be. The unspoken promise. The days blended together in a soft haze of growing comfort and unspoken understanding. Emily and Jonathan found a rhythm between them that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't defined by grand gestures or endless conversation, but rather by the quiet moments they shared, the way the world seemed to pause when they were together, and the connection that stretched far beyond words. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Emily found herself walking through the garden alone, her thoughts swirling in a way they hadn't before. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a soft golden hue across the landscape, and the night was approaching, with its familiar chill. She paused by the old oak tree, her hand resting gently against its rough bark. She closed her eyes, inhaling the cool air, as she let her thoughts settle. Things had changed between her and Jonathan, and not just in the way they had connected emotionally. There was something deeper now, an unspoken promise, a quiet trust that neither of them had acknowledged fully. It was as though they had both stepped into this space together, unsure of where it would lead, but trusting that wherever it took them, they would face it side by side. As she stood there, lost in thought, she felt a soft presence beside her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Jonathan. His energy, his calm presence had become so familiar to her that it almost felt as though he were a part of the air she breathed. He was standing just behind her now, the gentle rustle of the grass beneath his feet telling her that he had arrived quietly, as he always did. She didn't need to ask him to speak. She knew he would wait for her as he always did, until she was ready. "You're here," she said softly, her voice carrying a sense of warmth that had settled into her chest. She had never been more certain of his presence, more aware of the peace it brought her. Jonathan didn't answer immediately, his presence standing still beside her, just close enough for her to feel his warmth, but not so close that it felt intrusive. There was a certain reverence in the space between them, a shared understanding that had begun to deepen with each passing day. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a quiet weight. "I've been thinking a lot about you, about us," he began, his tone reflective but steady. "About what this is, what we are to each other." Emily turned to face him, her heart racing as she looked into his eyes. His gaze was steady, filled with a quiet intensity that spoke volumes without saying a word. She didn't need to ask him what he meant. She already knew. "We've been here for a while," Emily replied, her voice soft yet filled with a quiet certainty. "We've been in this space of unspoken promises, of trust that doesn't need to be said aloud. But I think we both know it's there." Jonathan's eyes softened, his lips curving into a small but meaningful smile. "I think I've always known it was there, Emily. Even before I met you. Even before we shared that first moment under the oak tree. I just didn't know how to name it." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. There was something undeniably comforting about his honesty, his willingness to let his guard down with her. She had never expected him to open up so fully, but now, in this moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "You don't need to name it," she whispered. "We don't need to define it. We just need to let it be, let it grow, without rushing or questioning." Jonathan's gaze lingered on her, his expression softening with an emotion she couldn't quite place. He reached out, his hand brushing gently against hers, a quiet, tender touch that spoke louder than any words could. It was as if the touch was a silent promise, a promise that no matter where they went from here, they would walk this path together. "I'm not afraid anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not afraid of this, of what's happening between us. I think it's because I found something I didn't know I was looking for, and I don't want to lose it." Emily's heart fluttered at his words, her breath catching in her chest. the raw honesty in his voice made her feel as though she were standing on the edge of something monumental, something life-changing. And yet, at the same time, she felt the quiet reassurance that this was right, that they were exactly where they needed to be. "You won't lose it," she replied softly, her voice filled with certainty. "Not as long as we're both here, together." The air around them seemed to shift, the night growing cooler as the stars above them began to twinkle softly in the vast expanse of the sky. But even in the quiet of the evening, amidst the growing darkness, Emily felt a warmth within her that seemed to come from Jonathan's words, from the unspoken promise between them. The weight of their emotions was no longer something to be feared. It was a bond, a connection that had grown slowly but steadily, like a quiet river carving its way through a valley. Neither of them needed to rush. There was no need to define or label it. All they needed was to let it flow, to let it unfold in its own time, in its own way. Jonathan stepped closer to her then, his presence enveloping her like a familiar embrace. And as they stood there together, the world around them felt like it had faded into the background. All that mattered was the space they occupied, the quiet understanding they shared, and the promise of tomorrow, a promise that didn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her heart full as she looked up at him, "for showing me that sometimes we don't have to find the answers. We just need to trust the process." Jonathan's smile deepened, and in that moment, Emily realized that he was right. They didn't have to have all the answers. They didn't need to figure everything out tonight or even tomorrow. What mattered was that they had found each other, and in each other, they had found something far more meaningful than answers. They had found trust, connection, and the quiet promise of something beautiful that was unfolding, one moment at a time. And beneath the oak tree, as the night sky stretched above them, they both knew that this was only the beginning. The quiet. After the storm, the days turned into weeks, and the seasons began their slow dance of change. The warm, golden light of summer faded into the cooler, crisp air of autumn, and the leaves around the old oak tree started to turn shades of amber and gold. Each day felt more like a chapter in a story they were both learning to live. A story without expectations or labels, but filled with moments that spoke volumes. Emily and Jonathan continued to meet under the oak tree, their time together becoming more effortless, more natural. They no longer needed to fill every silence with words. The quiet between them had become their own language, a language of trust, of connection, of love that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Yet, on one particularly cold evening, as the first frost began to kiss the ground and the air grew crisp, something shifted again, something that neither of them had been prepared for. It wasn't a storm exactly, but a whisper of uncertainty that seemed to hover just out of reach. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a lingering question that both of them had been avoiding. And on this night, it came to the surface. Jonathan arrived a little later than usual. Emily had already made her way to their spot beneath the oak tree, the ground covered in the golden leaves that had fallen over the past few weeks. The chill in the air was sharp, but it was the kind of cold that made everything feel more alive, more present. She was lost in her thoughts when she heard the soft crunch of footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw Jonathan walking toward her, his face slightly tense, his eyes focused, but not entirely present. The usual warmth that had radiated from him seemed absent, and her heart gave a soft thud in her chest. "Hey," she greeted him, her voice soft but concerned. "Is everything okay?" Jonathan stopped a few feet away from her, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. He stood still for a moment, gazing out at the horizon, the setting sun casting long shadows across the garden. It seemed like a perfect, tranquil evening, yet the air between them felt thick with unspoken words. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice distant, as though the weight of his thoughts had built up to this moment. "About us. About everything." Emily's heart sank slightly, the familiar warmth of their shared silences now replaced with an unease she couldn't quite shake. She looked up at him, her eyes searching for some clue as to what was going on behind his words. "What about us?" she asked, her voice steady, though her chest tightened. Jonathan took a deep breath, his gaze shifting toward the ground for a brief moment before meeting hers again. I think we've come so far without really asking ourselves what comes next. We've spent so much time enjoying the present, rightfully so. But I'm starting to wonder, what happens when the present ends?" Emily swallowed, her heart beating a little faster at the shift in his tone. She had always known that their connection was deep, that it was something they had both stepped into with trust and vulnerability. But now, with Jonathan standing before her, it felt as though something was about to change. She wasn't sure if it was a question they had both been avoiding or a realization that had come to him on his own. But either way, she felt the weight of it. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice uncertain. "Are you saying you want to walk away?" He shook his head quickly, the movement almost frantic. "No, that's not it. Not at all. It's just, I've never felt this way before. And I think I'm scared, Emily. I'm scared of losing what we have, and I'm scared that maybe I'm not ready to give all of myself, even though I want to." Emily stepped closer to him, her own fear mirrored in his words. She reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm, grounding them both in the present. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was a silence of understanding, a silence that allowed them to feel each other's emotions without the need for more words. "I don't know what's coming next either," she said softly. "But I know that I'm here, right here with you, and I'm willing to walk through whatever comes, as long as we walk together." Jonathan's gaze softened, and for a moment the distance that had settled between them began to disappear. He took a step closer to her, the warmth of his presence washing over her, replacing the uncertainty with something more comforting. "I don't want to lose you, Emily," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "You won't," she promised, her heart beating steadily in her chest. "Not if we keep trusting each other." And in that moment, everything shifted again, not in the grand, dramatic way that Emily had imagined, but in a small, subtle way that made her feel more certain than ever before. They didn't need to have all the answers, didn't need to have everything figured out. They just needed to continue trusting, to continue walking forward in the quiet spaces between their words. The stars began to twinkle overhead as the evening darkened, the crisp night air filling their lungs with each breath they took. Jonathan reached out then, his hand brushing against hers, and the simple touch was all the reassurance they both needed. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was enough. They didn't know what the future held. They didn't know if it would always be easy or if the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But in that quiet moment, as they stood together beneath the oak tree, they both knew one thing for certain. They were willing to face it together, and that, in its simplest form, was all they needed.